Welcome to Square One Financial Group Pre-Planning for Life Agents. This is Jason Woodard. We are going to have a brief discussion on what it's like doing pre-planning funerals versus final expense and life insurance in the industry space. There is a huge growth of pre-planning funerals that is taking place alongside some major changes a lot of major life carriers are making in the industry when it comes to final expense. So being that our agency does this and has done this for a long time, we have a lot of experience. We thought we would do a nice webinar. If anyone had more questions, just to point out some basics, and then if anyone needed our help or needed a place to learn more about it, we'd be willing to help. So let's go ahead and jump into the presentation. So who are we? We are actually Square One Financial Group. My name is Jason Woodard, and Mark Collins is my business partner. We have a corporate background working in actual funeral homes with families. In fact, we work through COVID-19 in the funeral industry hands-on. We do have 25 plus years in the financial and funeral industries. We are licensed to sell insurance and annuities, not just funeral pre-plans. So many of our agents do both. We are licensed in 31 states plus the District of Columbia. We are a notary. Now, our network of reliable insurance partners, you can see that we have many carriers that we have on our belt. Some of them are used for different things and different purposes, just like anyone who's in the industry knows they have their own Rolodex of carriers for different purposes. But specific carriers that we are direct to carrier to are who we're going to be working with in the funeral industry, okay? So pre-planning versus final expense. Let's start here. What is the major differences between pre-planning versus a final expense policy? I know a lot of people and agents go into a home, they meet with a client, and the client says, hey, I'm thinking about pre-planning my funeral. I talked to one of those guys, and I remember when I was a final expense agent, I tried to just be like, hey, it's the same thing as, you're putting the money away, blah, blah, blah. But there are some differences. So I want to go ahead and review those differences. So a final expense pay policy is a life pay policy. Typically, even though they can be, paid differently, the average middle class American is going to get the minimum payment they can for the amount of coverage they want and whatever you agree to with them and help them figure out. And then they're going to pay on that for pretty much the rest of their life because a lot of those times they're ill, they're on meds, or, a lot of them just aren't in the demographic. If anyone's done final expense who watches this video, you'll understand what I'm saying too, in a high volume purchase single pay or 3 or 5, 10 pays. So versus limited pay, which funeral pre-planning only comes in 1, 3, 5, 10 or single pay. And because of that, our clients end up saving thousands in premiums versus a lifetime pay because they're only having that limited pay structure. Now, final expense is not whole life for cash value, right? It typically never builds meter cash, even though whole life can be used as an amazing chassis for cash value. It is not typically made that way for final expense policies. Now, funeral pre-plans, they do have a built-in 3% plus growth rate to keep up with inflation. So that when you're putting in, say, $10,000 over the next 5 years, you're going to come out with it being worth approximately $12,500, $13,000. And then what's going to happen is if you want to go to a more expensive funeral home, or if the client wants to leave that cash over to family, like you'll see, I'll talk about here in a second, then they can do that. Okay. Final expense policies with a pre-planning guide is not a true funeral plan. We see it all the time. In fact, I was guilty of it earlier on in my career. I wanted to give out final expense policies with a pre-planning guide and say, hey, this is going to cover your funeral. And in essence, it would. But the biggest problem you guys run into is when you do that, they need a death certificate for that to pay out. And then they end up waiting to access those funds unless they do a collateral assignment in which they have to give up 5% of whatever the funeral cost is, 6% of the funeral cost is off the top of the policy. And then whatever the rest is can be used toward the funeral. So A true pre-need plan is assigned or unassigned to a funeral home so they don't have to do that. As soon as the person dies, a funeral director can sign off on a form and they're paid directly from the insurance company without having to have that wait period due to a death certificate. So there is a big difference when we're talking about doing true pre-needs versus a final expense policy, okay? And by law, a GPL or a general price list should be used in all presentations, meaning the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, has stated by law that funeral homes and the funeral home providers need to absolutely be open about their pricing so that families do not get taken advantage of. So when you're working with a family, you're actually, and you're talking about pre-planning by law, you're supposed to have a general price list of the funeral home that you think they're going to want to go to on the table. Okay, so there's a big difference between that and doing an evaluation based on, college, mortgage, things like that, right? Leftover cash is returned to family. That's exactly what I was talking about a second ago. What that means is if a family goes in to the funeral home and they decide that they have a $15,000 policy and they decide that, you know what, um, let's do this $10,000 plan. That extra $5,000, which is typically the growth rate, is returned back to the family in a tax-free distribution. Okay. And they can use that for, like these days, cremation is extremely popular. They can use that monies to do a cremation placement instead of having an urn sitting on a mantle for the rest of their life. Or they could take their loved one home and have an extra $3,000 to maybe take a month off work or half a month off work to grief, which is sometimes one of the biggest things that needs to happen. Okay. And then overall, you will see there's less cancellations than final expense because when we're planning someone's headstone, their casket, their plans, everything, and then it comes in a nice leather binder as a presentation folder for them to give to their family as a gift, you see a lot less cancellations than you do final expense policies. Now, how do the commissions work? Okay, life commissions versus pre-plan commissions. Life insurance is based on annualized premium, which typically results in a little bit less commissions than you would see in a funeral pre-plan policy, which is based on the funeral amount. So if somebody had a $25,000 funeral, you're taking home about $2,500 in commission off of that versus a $25,000 life policy. It all really depends on the annualized premium. If it's $70 a month, you're not making anywhere near $2,500. So that's just something to consider. It is very lucrative, although that is not the only reason we do this. We do it because there's a mission behind it. And speaking of that, we want to talk a little bit about that. What is the mission and why do we do it? So I'm going to play a quick video here called Why Pre-Plan so you guys can see what a client would see and why this is so important and why pre-planning is so special. Okay, and what makes it so different than final expense.
It's human nature to plan for life's big events and occasions, like college, weddings, retirement, or even vacations. But it also makes sense to plan now for what will happen to us all, even though it may be difficult to think about your own funeral. Planning ahead for the final celebration of your life and discussing it with your loved ones can help your family at an emotional time. Planning and pre-funding your funeral is one of the most compassionate gifts you can give your loved ones. When someone passes away, family members are often left with dozens of decisions and burdened with unplanned costs. That's why sharing your preferences and pre-planning your funeral can give your family peace of mind during a stressful time. In times of celebration and in times of challenge, families and friends are our support networks. When we lose someone, we rely on one another. Funerals allow loved ones to gather for emotional support, share stories, give eulogies, and celebrate your life. They provide closure and help the healing process begin. Start by speaking with your family about your wishes. You may find it's a difficult topic to discuss, but you can find comfort in knowing that talking about it now can spare your family from an added emotional and financial burden in the future. You might even find it liberating to share your final preferences, or that it brings your family closer together. Pre-planning your memorial service gives you an opportunity to share how you'd like to be remembered. You can personalize the service so that it's meaningful to you and your family. For instance, a viewing or visitation allows your loved ones to say goodbye. A traditional funeral or a celebration of life helps your family pay tribute to your memory. You can choose specific readings or music that are meaningful to you. You can ask loved ones to forego flowers and instead contribute to a charity in your name. You have many choices. By making them now, your family won't have to later, and you can ensure your final wishes are fulfilled.
So you can see that that product, Legacy of Love, there, that is our funeral product. Let me go and pause that video. And when we're talking about this, if you want more information, you can reach out to contracting at squareonefinancialgroup.com, and we will be glad to give you as much information as you want. The reason I wanted to end with that video is I what wanted you to see what families see when they talk to us and what they experience and all of the thoughts and planning that goes into pre-planning and why it's so different than final expense, where we're just selling insurance. You really do develop a relationship with these people, and it is something that becomes a more of a lifelong relationship with the family. And it's not just a quick final expense policy sitting on somebody's couch on a Saturday morning. So if you'd like more information on working with families and discussing more about this and the differences between um, traditional final expense and life insurance and funeral pre-planning, please reach out to us at contracting at squareonefinancialgroup.com, and we would be glad to have that discussion with you. But thank you to anyone who watches this video. Again, my name is Jason Woodard, and please reach out to us with any questions, and we'd be glad to provide you with some answers.